If you work in internal audit, you know this pressure. You are constantly testing the limits of operations run by powerful executive management, and you have to do it without breaking the glass. This maps the structural paradox of the profession. An auditor provides an objective evaluation of the executives who control their career incentives. If you surrender to pressure, the executive consumes the dynamic, and the assurance function ceases to exist. But fighting an ego-driven battle over a risk rating is equally destructive. You snap the professional relationship and get permanently labeled as uncollaborative or overly academic. Successful auditors bypass this interpersonal friction completely. They rely on an escalation protocol, a strict tactical playbook designed to handle executive pushback. This protocol uses raw structural data and linear logic to enforce critical findings, protecting the integrity of the audit while preserving long-term working relationships. Objective systematization is the only reliable method to survive and neutralize subjective executive negotiation. Before any negotiation with management begins, you have to build an unassailable objective baseline. Amateur auditors often base their risk ratings on a gut feeling or a subjective interpretation of a flaw. That immediately invites debate. This represents step 1, the anchor. We pull a debated finding out of a subjective area, forcing it into the board-approved observation rating matrix. By calculating precise financial exposure or operational downtime, we mathematically tether the observation to the critical or high quadrant. When you remove subjectivity from the equation, management can no longer argue with you. They have to argue against their own corporate matrix. Once the rating is anchored, we deploy step 2, the shield. This is the protocol for drafting the observation text itself. This diagram shows a disorganized draft condensing into a hyper-objective structure. The text follows a strict sequential chain: condition, criteria, root cause, and finally the implication. Every link in this chain, especially the future implications, must be locked in with hard, undeniable evidence. Writing it this way builds a defensive perimeter, preemptively blocking standard executive counterarguments. A mathematically anchored and structurally strict observation defends itself before you ever walk into the meeting room. When you sit down at the negotiation table, the primary psychological obstacle to your finding being accepted is executive ego. We handle this with step 3, the olive branch, which involves intentionally shifting the root cause away from human error. A chief executive or functional head will instinctively fight any finding that makes their team look incompetent. This diagram illustrates the pivot. Instead of highlighting the human element, which generates conflict, we shift the spotlight to a mechanical gear, a design flaw, an outdated standard operating procedure, or a legacy system limitation. Blaming the mechanism allows the executive to save face. They can accept the finding and redirect their energy toward repairing the system. Even with the ego disarmed, we execute step 4, the vault. This requires formalizing the discussion immediately. Leaving a critical finding to a casual meeting room conversation is dangerous. The severity will inevitably be verbally diluted or dismissed entirely. The paper trail protocol demands that you document the observation and all supporting evidence in an official email as soon as the meeting ends. As seen in this interface, strategically copying higher management, like the chief financial officer, locks the finding into the official record, creating a document that cannot be ignored. Redirecting blame disarms the immediate interpersonal conflict, while the paper trail ensures the observation remains part of the formal risk profile until it is addressed. If management formally pushes back and uses standard corporate excuses to downgrade the rating, we escalate. We deploy step 5, the compensating control challenge. The most common excuse is that the risk is already mitigated by alternative internal checks. The required tactical response is simple: demand formal, documented evidence of this alternative control operating effectively throughout the exact sample period you audited. Because most compensating controls are informal or undocumented, they rarely meet the standards of evidence required for an audit. When management cannot provide proof of the control's operation, they are forced to accept the original rating. If they try a different angle, we execute step 6, connect the dots. Executives frequently attempt to isolate findings, arguing that a single exception is an anomaly deserving a low risk label. This diagram shows the counter tactic. by taking multiple isolated low-risk anomalies, like an access control failure here and a master data change there, and grouping them together, we reveal a massive systemic threat. When internal management stubbornly refuses to acknowledge that severity, we use Step 7, the bad cop. We reframe the internal risk strictly in the context of external statutory frameworks or regulatory bodies. Whether citing Sarbanes-Oxley guidelines or federal labor codes, you explicitly point out that these frameworks shift legal liability directly to the board of directors. This shift moves the conversation from internal friction to statutory compliance, turning the finding into a primary tool for protecting the board from personal liability. In the final phase of the protocol, management realizes they cannot defeat the logic, but they will still fight bitterly over the semantics. As this simulation demonstrates, executives will aggressively try to scrub severe visual indicators from existence, avoiding the words high or critical on their permanent records. When they do this, we execute the final tactic: negotiate the action, not the rating. You offer a calculated trade. You agree to present the finding to the audit committee as a lower medium risk. This diagram maps the strict condition for that compromise. Management must formally agree to implement a specific automated corrective and preventive action, or CAPA, within a strict 30-day deadline. The core objective of the assurance function is actual risk remediation. Winning a semantic argument over a specific label is irrelevant if the risk remains. An auditor achieves true victory when they use this escalation protocol to engineer a demonstrably safer organization. Improved process will always outrank internal politics.